before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show. Hey, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and with me today is Christopher Messina, the CEO of Tanbreez, a company that is sitting on what is ranked as the biggest potential rare earth element resource on the face of the earth. Christopher, how are you doing today?
I feel about as good as a man can be sitting on a pile of minerals this big. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, man. I tell you, we talked a little bit last week, and you told me that this resource is why Donald Trump wanted to buy Greenland a few years ago.
It is indeed. You know, we had a meeting in the White House. My partner, Greg Barnes, who is the chief geologist and founder of Tanbreez, we went to the White House in a meeting with a cast of thousands describing the value of the materials in our mine for U.S. national security. And 5 days later, President Trump offered to buy the country. So I think that counts as a win in terms of persuasion.
But he had the right idea. I swear he had the right idea. But anyway.
Not quite sure his approach was spot on, but who am I, Monday morning quarterback?
Yeah, that's a frequent problem with Mr. Trump. Anyway, before we get into the Q&A here on this amazing project, take a few minutes to talk about your background, how you came to be at Tanbreez, and how you guys came to be in possession of the rights to this amazing resource.
Sure, real quickly. I'll not suck the oxygen out of the discussion, but a native New Yorker, University of Chicago grad, MBA at the Australian Graduate School of Management, University of Sydney. My career has been 30 years in global capital markets, half on advanced trading systems, turning electronic exchange into electronic. That entire thing that became called fintech, which I helped craft when I was but a child at the Goldman Sachs before it became public back in the late 90s, and worked over the years on dozens of really interesting projects around better efficiencies in exchange markets, commodities markets. The other half, very related to that, was hard rock mining and natural resource exploitation, better ways to finance and trade physical commodities, and then understanding from a national security perspective. So I came out of a family of military contractors and was a member of Ben's Business Executives for National Security. So done a lot of work, public-private partnerships with the federal government on U.S. national security, always with an eye towards the private sector. And in the course of all that, about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was helping the Navy with some logistics issues for jet fuel at Bagram Air Force Base, became convinced that we could solve this rare earth supply chain problem in the private sector. Didn't need government intervention, didn't need government help. Unlike the Chinese, who since Deng Xiaoping have had a pronounced mercantilist program in favor of developing a rare earth industry. And that journey led me to Greg Barnes, this brilliant Australian geologist who found and staked what has become the Tanbreez ore body way back in basically 2000. Has spent a huge amount of his own money on the project. It's incredibly well defined, incredibly impressive resource. We now got an exploitation license as of 2020, and now we're looking to build the mine.
Well, it's an amazing resource. And apparently, I guess the government of Greenland, which, by the way, only has 55,000 people in it, for folks who don't know, the government of Greenland is all in favor of moving forward with this project, right?
Oh, very much so. I mean, one of the best things about working with the folks in Greenland is, they've got a well thought out mining law. They've got a very transparent government, how they approach things. In fact, you could anyone in the world can go to the mines department website and find their exploitation license. They make, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and they come out of the gate with a really well thought out mining law. Hardworking folks throughout the government who want to make sure this happens. The people of South Greenland are wildly in favor of this. It's going to be one of the major sources of wealth creation for the country going forward, both our mine and the mining industry in general, as they separate out from Denmark in a rather kind of complicated decoupling, which I will not try to explain. They're very much in favor of it. They can't wait for us to get going.
Well, mining.com recently ranked this resource as the number one ranked potential new mine on the face of the earth, right? And what goes into that ranking? Is it just based strictly on the potential available resource?
Well, yes. Well, their ranking was about the best potential rare earth mines in the world, and they, funnily enough, we are far and away the largest, but they underestimated our deposit by about 80%. So even reporting 20% of what our numbers are, we're still the hugest. And they were modeling theirs on the main factor was the total contained rare earths, right? So that could be a little misleading for folks who don't fully understand this market, because if you look at the lanthanide series at the bottom of the periodic table, and the first few are what are called the light rare earths, and the latter part of it are the heavy rare earths. One of the things that's most valuable about what we have is up to 28% or so of the contained rare earths in our mineralization are the heavy rare earths, which are much more expensive, harder to find. So it's seriously one of those things that becomes a world-changing mine when we get into production.
Yeah, and people hear, and I was one of them until I did some research a few years ago. People hear the term rare earth elements, but don't know really what that is, what they're used for, and why they're important to this energy transition. Talk about how these elements are used in really pretty much every gadget we have in our homes and our cars, basically.
You bet. All advanced industrial processes, especially anything evolving around miniaturization, require these things. So a lot of them, praseodymium, neodymium, are kind of most popularly understood as being permanent magnets, as opposed to electromagnets. For those who suffered through physics in high school, we're not going to torture you with the difference, but a permanent magnet is what it sounds like. It's magnetized, and it is permanently magnetized, whereas an electromagnet requires a flow of electricity to turn it into a magnet. So very briefly, if you were going to build a new plant to build tractors in, say, I don't know, Moline, Illinois, right, you could have a 75-ton electromagnet made of iron, because who cares? Because space doesn't matter. You put it into a massive factory floor, so it eats up 800 square feet as opposed to a centimeter. Who cares? But for anything that's going to go into a drone or a phone or a plane or a car or anything that moves, the power to weight ratio is really what matters, right? So the more power you get per kilogram of material in your stator or rotor in your engines, it's more important. So anything that requires mobility requires all these materials. Things like the blades spinning on those massive wind towers, right? If you tried to make those out of steel, you literally couldn't. The size is too large; it would just crumple down to the ground. So things like our gadolinium go into that. Hundreds of kilograms go into each turbine blade to make them firm enough, light enough, and strong enough to actually perform their function. So pretty much up and down the chain, whether it's from magnets to alloys to colorants to glass dyes to anything that goes into any piece of that chain, whether it's the battery storage, the electric distribution, the miniaturization of components, they all require these. And so you can see why demand is booming as high-tech gadgets become a commonplace, both retail and in the business world. It just requires all of this. You need it. Military equipment, you need this for guidance systems. The ends to which the rare earth elements are put are almost limitless. And so sitting on top of this is 1,000 times better than sitting on a gold mine.
So, the big problem here in the United States, and from the perspective of what I do related to energy, these elements are obviously going to be crucial to the progress of this energy transition we're on, from fossil fuels and nuclear to renewables and electric vehicles. Frankly, I think that it's more like an energy addition and an energy
Yes.
innovation than any kind of a transition, but that's another question. We're going to have big quantities here in the US and other parts of the Western world
Oh,
of these
huge.
rare earth elements, enormous quantities.
Yep.
And right now, China controls the supply chains for the most part of rare earth minerals, right?
Yes, they do.
Across the world.
They do.
Yeah. And so obviously why this is important, and this is what I'm trying to get to for our viewers. Why this is important to the United States is because here's the biggest deposit on earth sitting on an island country right off the coast of North America.
Yes.
And it's free from any China entanglements right now. And so, talk about why that's so critical for the U.S. in this energy transition.
Sure. Well, you had to highlight it geopolitically. When I was talking to an old friend of mine, as a retired admiral in the U.S. Navy, about this mine. He said, "Where's that mine again?" And I pulled up a map and I showed him it's on the southern tip of Greenland. He said, "Oh, that's ours." Right. So, meaning in time of war, Greenland is basically in our sphere of influence, and we control that. Between hopefully there's no additional war, but that's proven to be a vain hope.
Let's hope not.
So because of its location, it's dead smack between Europe and the U.S., closer actually to Canada and the U.S. All of the kind of material needs. I'll give Deng Xiaoping this enormous credit. Right, he foresaw back in the 80s, as he said, the Saudis have oil and China have rare earths, and the idea being that he foresaw correctly that the massive development of industrial processes and the refinement of technologies were all going to trend towards the need for these materials in far greater amounts that were in demand in the 80s when he made that observation. So I give him huge credit, his team, for understanding that and for embarking upon a very mercantilist vision of making China a dominant player in that space. And I think over time, that kind of dominant player perspective morphed into a desire for monopolistic control, whether accidentally, whether deliberately, doesn't really kind of matter. But the kind of perception of the Chinese government over time is that that's a long story, but the transition from Chairman Deng's way of looking at the world to Chairman Xi's way of looking at the world meant that there were a huge amount of competitive reasons to create an internal industry. I look at the way the Chinese have competed over the years into kind of roughly two buckets, and it's no secret. And again, it's a personal view, what I would call kind of fair versus unfair competition. Yeah. Fair competition is they're investing a huge amount of money into their internal industrial processes, right? They produce thousands of PhDs in chemical material science every year in comparison to the half dozen or so that we produce. So if you're investing in your human capital and you're investing in your own industry, that's great. Unfair would be more like, I don't know, maybe pressuring people and dumping practices and driving prices down on world markets, like, kind of not exactly what you'd call fair competition. But through both means, they have put themselves into a position where even when they stopped demanding that they control the mines that produce rare earths, they shifted, I think intelligently, to the idea that they should control the processing. So irrespective of where you produce, like Mountain Pass in California, owned by MP Materials, their sole customer is China. They buy all of their output and they turn it into oxides in China. And the major dynamic which has shifted in the last couple of years is, even back in 2011, a lot of people will have remembered the bit of the dust up over the Senkaku Islands. It was a territorial dispute about some tiny bits of rock right in the Japanese territorial waters. The Chinese retaliated, and I think have come to regret that, because they showed a very heavy hand, and they caused people to be concerned. Prices of some rare earths went up 10x in a week because they refused to keep shipping export to South Korean industry and the rest. So they both kind of, I think, in my opinion, blundered by showing a very heavy hand there. But they also emphasized to the rest of the world that they were willing to use these materials as a weapon, which again, we've just seen that very recently. So I think long term, if everyone calms down, it'll be fine. But my last point is the successful evolution of their own internal industrial processes means that They don't have to have a policy of not wanting to export material anymore, because their own industrial internal processes among all their companies, they require all the material they're producing. In fact, they are now going to very shortly be a net importer of rare earth materials. And so the ability of Tanbreez to get online and provide to the market the vast amounts of production that are capable from our deposit, that means that we will very much shift the balance of market competitiveness to the West. We will have, a Western-owned mine that produces the needs certainly for North America and Europe at first, and anyone else who needs it, obviously, in a way that is kind of really hard to beat. We've got just a vast, vast deposit in comparison to what anyone else has.
So, talk about, I mean, you've been, of course, y'all been working on this project for several years now. Talk about the roadblocks to getting this thing kicked off and moving towards production.
Well, I think there are a few things, and I only got involved about 7 years ago. So again, Greg Barnes put this in motion. He's been a very experienced geologist, exploration geologist. He's had a long and successful career with a lot of notable discoveries and things that were turned into companies. And he found this, and I think, realized this could be the crown jewel of a great career, right?
Yeah.
And so he's poured a huge amount of his own personal wealth into it. Drilled a huge number. We got thousands of holes, 500,000 assays, I think, chemical tests, something like more than 1,800 PhD and academic papers have been written on the deposit. It is a very, very well studied and characterized deposit. And we got our exploitation license, which is, for those who don't really understand, in any country or in Greenland, you can get your exploration license, which is, yeah, please stake some ground, go drill some holes. Hope you find something, right? But to get an exploitation license is a very long process and designed to make sure that the environment is looked at, the social impact, employment, all that sort of stuff, to make sure that Greenland will not suffer what has been called the resource curse, where countries who are not very well managed, right, see a lot of benefit go to foreigners who come in and just take the resource.
Right.
The Greenlanders give it a lot of thought. And they've got a great Mines Act that kind of balances the needs of both the Greenlandic people, the treasury, the local workers, the environment, and foreign capital. And that process just took some time. So when we finally got our exploitation license in 2020, that was great. I found all the investment we needed in early 2020. And in an irony fit for the ages, the gentleman who was going to fund the project caught the COVID virus and died on April 7th before he could fund it. So you just kind of can't make that up.
Yeah,
and
you can't.
Then we just had a bit of a delay. COVID, it's already thankfully in the rearview mirror, but it really slowed everything down, right? The idea that people were going to be looking at some brand new project in the south tip of Greenland when they were still wondering whether they were going to have cash flow to keep their offices open.
Right.
Everything slowed down. And now we're just back in the market and we're starting to talk to investors about it.
So, what about the government? I mean, we just had the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act last year, the infrastructure law the year before that. There's this perception that the federal government and its various agencies now have these big pots of money, whose purpose is supposed to be to kickstart projects just like this one, right? That would help the United States move ahead rapidly with this build out of new green energy resources, solar and wind, electric vehicles, batteries, all of these things that require these rare earth minerals. So I'm sure you've had discussions with the government, about accessing some of those stimulus resources, right?
Yes. Well, I refer back to that classic old Harvard Business School paper on the folly of hoping for A while rewarding B. Right. Meaning, unfortunately, and we've spoken to lots of folks, a lot of hardworking folks in the federal government who are trying to do the right thing, whether it's the defense,
Sure,
state, XM, right? Everyone's focused, and many people are focused on getting things done. The overarching problem is how the U.S. federal bureaucracy has kind of grown in a sclerotic fashion. That you've got 12 to 18-month budgetary cycles. The biggest risk that anyone will manage, which can also be true of the private sector, is personal career risk. No one wants to be the face of the next Solyndra. No
Sure.
one wants to be the person that said yes to something that left a $200 million hole in the public's balance sheet. And so the in theory, it sounds really great, but in practice, because of the way kind of risk is allocated and judged, the U.S. federal government usually ends up giving money to companies that don't need it because it's safe. Really.
Right,
So they
right,
allocated
yeah.
like $40 million to a rare earth magnet project, which is co-owned by two massive corporations. One is, I think, top 100 company in the nation, who certainly didn't need the $40 million, but it's safe
Oh,
to give
yeah.
it to them, and you could say that you're stimulating it. So the only thing I would change in your initial question was you use the verb to kickstart, which means to start something from cold, right? From nowhere to up. They sadly, even though that might be the intent, and that might be what people think they're voting for in Congress, when it gets to bureaucracy, if it grinds through a very slow process, which even if the money comes, it takes a year to 2 years.
Yeah.
So it is really, when I work with the government a lot, I want to make it abundantly clear. A lot of really smart people are moving mountains to try to get some tangible assistance to this project, but it's just, it's like pushing molasses uphill in a snowstorm. And so if there a way to kind of unlock those processes to say, look, we're going to act like venture capitalists, and we're going to put money into 50 projects. 20 are going to fail. That's fine. You're not going to get dragged across the goal because we know 20 are going to fail and 10 are going to succeed and the others are going to middle along, right? If going into it, everyone were handed that remit, well, then they'd be freer to act. And you'd look at a project and you'd spend 5 or 6, even weeks would be a benefit, on top of this multi-month process, which in the end is just pushing paper. You're not getting any better due diligence by staring at the same Excel table for 7 months. So if the government is going to get in the space, in my opinion, they should just write checks, because that's how the Chinese are winning this resource war. They look at the data, they write a check.
Have you been approached by anyone from a Chinese company about this resource? I mean, you would think this would fit right in with China's Belt and Road Initiative.
There is global interest in what we have at Tanbreez. So, to the extent that anyone is in this space and interested, we get incomings from everybody, and there's nothing particularly wrong with having some kind of an arrangement. I worked very positively with some Chinese companies over the years. In this instance, we are still focused on, can we get this done, with Western capital? If it turns out that we have to, or have to sounds wrong. If it turns out that the best path forward for the company is that there's some arrangement with some Chinese off-takers, well, it's not the worst thing in the world. I would just question as to why it's like pulling teeth with American investors when this is so obviously a valuable thing.
Well, and from a geopolitical standpoint, right? I mean, it's obvious that from a strategic standpoint, this resource, China would love to be able to dominate that particular resource to maintain its dominance over the supply chains globally. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, and you would think the Defense Department, you would think the Pentagon would be pushing to secure this resource for the United States of America, wouldn't you?
You would think that. Again, it's like Milton Friedman wrote about the fact that how is it that so many well-intentioned, intelligent people go to Washington and make the world work, and we end up with the mess we have? It's a fascinating question. It's a biological question more than anything, right? If any one individual that I speak with in the Pentagon could wave his or her hand and fund it, I think we would have been funded in the Obama administration. We've talked to 3 administrations about this so far. I've not found anyone who says, who cares, right? Not at all. And yet you've got this bizarre system where you've got people with, high ranks, deep experience, and all the rest of it, who at the blink of a hat can invade a country and take it over in 3 days, can't seem to find money in the Pentagon couch cushions to fund something so obviously necessary to our national security. It's a bit of a baffling.
It is baffling. I mean, my God, the Pentagon just found a $7.2 billion accounting error 2 months ago. So
yeah. Well, if we could turn amortized capital costs into real cash, that would be a phenomenal trick.
yeah, it really would. It really would. What about private equity? I mean, I'm sure there's a concern among private funders, potential private equity of one thing. For one thing, I can just think of off the top of my head, if you if you invest in this mine and start really producing the minerals at a rapid pace, you could potentially, I suppose, crash the price for the elements themselves, right? I mean, so I'm sure there's a concern about that potential outcome anyway.
It's an interesting idea, but the growth curve of these things, by all accounts, by multiple analysts, and is just such that I think even though our deposit is massive, I think it would take us 10 years to get to a place where our annual output would begin to negatively impact prices. I
Okay.
can see that happening. Make no mistake, we've been approached dozens of times, and a lot of these people suffer from what I call Tanbreez derangement syndrome. If you're rational, we would come to some agreement about a valuation that worked, and we'd all go make a lot of money, and we'd change the world.
Right.
We get approached by people daily who are basically like, give me the deposit and I'll make sure your grandkids get a commission. I mean, it really looks ridiculous. And so this is a complete direct thumb in the eye and insult to a lot of the private equity firms in America. You all know who you are, who've approached us with the stupidest deals I've ever seen. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We would rather crawl along a little longer, cobble together the capital from other sources and get this thing going. We just get offered really, really, really stupid, unreasonable terms. I mean, $50 million has gone into this already, and they treat it like it's some speculative guesswork that they're going to have to like take a flyer on. So we're getting closer. I think we will find the money eventually, based on a lot of the market conversations we're having. Things just take time. But yeah, the short answer is no. We've got no shortage of interest. The interest is just been stupid.
Well, when we talked last week, you threw out this great idea that I would love to be the guy writing the story about if it were to happen, about putting together 20 oil guys, right, to toss in $1 million to 10 million apiece to jumpstart this rare earth minerals mine that changes the world, right?
You bet. Best story ever told.
It would be.
And we've been having that chat with some oil and gas guys just recently, as you know, and they're you barely can stay on the phone. They're laughing so hard at how that would go down, right? Like the entire energy transition is going to be funded by the evil guys you hate. Fantastic. So, we're at this point in the cycle. We've all been at this a long time. We got a great team, including CFO and others who raised large amounts of money in our careers. We're going to get it done. And a lot of the folks who are now expressing interest are expressing the correct kind of interest. So it's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when. Should be faster. I mean, the very fact of what we got, it is one of if the dictionary had to choose a diorama to explain the phrase asset rich, cash poor, we're there. We've got a phenomenal asset that a lot of investment has gone into, a lot of thoughtful, intelligent people have been part of. It's at this point just add money, and we will build this thing, and it will be a dynamism of growth for the people of Greenland. It'll be a secure supply chain for massively needed materials. And it's not just rare earths. We have standalone zirconium, hafnium, tantalum, and niobium minerals as a standalone mine in the deposit. Wow. So we've got this polymetallic mineralization in a friendly jurisdiction with an encouraging government, with a great team ready to go. And it really is just add water.
A couple of more questions. People hear these horror stories about the Chinese development of rare earth and how, they have very low environmental standards and leave these enormous messes across the landscape. That's not something that's going to happen at this mine, right?
No, not at all. I mean, quite the contrary. One of the things that it kind of astonishes me that kind of otherwise thoughtful analysts should take this into account. Remember when Deng was starting this rare earth push in '86, I think, China was not the country it is today. 1 billion people who were living on farms. They had no money. They had no jobs. They all rode bicycles. They were lucky to have a bicycle. So roughly speaking, that meant from an engineering perspective, every new industry that the Chinese were starting at that point in time we're more focused on job creation than return on investment, right? The exact opposite of where we are as a developed economy, where you want to make sure you're doing the most efficient thing you possibly can. So, just think of this thought experiment. If the engineer of the chemical processing plant for rare earths were presented with two different technologies by his engineers, right? So for this process, we could use this thing that is really efficient and employs 6 people, or this other thing that employs 700 people that need to sit there and constantly poke it once every 5 minutes. They chose the 700 job creator, and that just carried through. So the current way that they built a lot of these very expensive plants are very labor intensive. And for a long time, I'd say recently, they apparently have gotten better, even if it's only lip service to environmental standards. It was about job creation. And so they did that. Whereas the process that we're using, the actual test plan for the final chemical processing of how we're going to extract our final rare earth oxides out of our concentrate, the test mill was done like in a strip mall in suburban Canada. So it's no more dangerous than making soap.
Yeah.
So done correctly with correct environmental controls and correct, basic standard Western, ISO 2000, whatever it is, chemical handling processes, it's perfectly fine and a lot cheaper to do than it has historically been done. And I would say the last point is, those who are invested in the current state of affairs like to use that scary sort of, vision of environmental disaster as a way to prevent rare earth development in the West. Oh my God, it's going to be horrible. Your kids are going to have 7 heads. Your feet are going to fall off. Hey, no, no, it's going to be fine. Don't worry.
Well, and that brings me to another question. You talk about these elements going into the making of the blades on the wind towers, and solar panels. I wonder, is it recoverable and recyclable when those things have to be discarded? I mean, right now they're just kind of being piled up out in West Texas in landfills. But can you reprocess any of these kinds of elements? It may not be financially feasible, I guess, but I just wonder if it's possible.
Those are 2 questions.
Yeah.
Many of them are it's possible, right? So to take apart, millions of cell phones at a time and extract out each bit of gadolinium, praseodymium, and samarium. Like maybe, it is yet to be proven economical. And I'm not going to throw shade at any of the efforts, but a lot of people have kind of tried to get into this idea of we're going to recycle a lot of these materials. It's very hard to speak in generalities. Like the blades, for example, there's no proven way to kind of unalloy that in a way that's even remotely economically feasible.
So what that means,
even if unalloy is a word, what's that? Sorry.
Well, what that means is, with current technology as it sits today, what that means is the United States has to find more and more quantities of this stuff from mines like the one you're sitting on, right? You're not going to be able to just take it back out of the wind blades and use it again.
And even if we could theoretically recycle 100% of what has gone into our industrial products, which we can't, obviously, but even if we could, that would not remotely meet growing demand, which is, cumulative annual growth rates between 12 and 30%, depending upon the material, stretching into decades ahead for the foreseeable future. So no, there's no way to recycle your way out of this problem. Part of what I forgot to say is that, as in conjunction with, looking for capital and support, almost equally importantly, we're announcing very shortly a strategic partnership with TB Services out of Louisiana and 1861 Industries.
Fantastic.
Right, exactly. Oil and gas guys back in 1927. So extreme experience in extreme environments. They worked offshore, onshore. And as we were looking to refine the processes both in Greenland for crushing, blasting, all the rest of that, we've entered into a partnership with them where the tools and processes they've developed are far more advanced than sort of the classical model of amphiblasting, hauling away, putting into a crusher and all the rest of it. They're streamlining lots of that. We won't go into the details right now, but we'll be able to talk about it in the future. But the essence is they may be able to advance our date of production by as much as 50 to 75%. So instead of 4 to 5 years, once we break ground and start moving, we could actually be in production within 16 to 18 months.
Okay. Okay. Well, we're running up against time. This has been a wonderful discussion. I want to keep up with you. Please update me anytime you reach a key milestone in the project. I'd like to have you back on to talk about it again, write more about it. And all I ask is if you put together a deal with 20 oil men to kick this thing off, please let me know so I can be the one that breaks the story.
You bet. You got exclusive coverage rights on that. David, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad you kind of got a grip on just how critical this is to the economy, national security, all the rest of it. And you bet you get exclusive coverage on the big coup where we land the oil barons as our backers.
All right. My editors at Forbes will appreciate it.
we appreciate that. So thanks so much for your time.
All right, man. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to our extraordinary producer, Eric Perel, to the Sandstone Group for hosting our podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association for being our sponsor. I'm David Blackmon, and that's all for now.